former contributor and all-around good guy, Andy Bird, a builder, an innovator, an AI expert. Welcome to the podcast. And today we're talking about something that I know is near and dear to your heart, about AI and how AI is offering a whole new perspective of what enterprises can do in digital transformation. So, welcome to the podcast, Andy. And I'd like to get the ball rolling talking about AI. First and foremost, what are the use cases that you find as the most traditional use cases of AI?
Well, I mean, so we gotta back up one step, right? We have AI as we know it today versus AI as we knew it yesterday. So making sure everybody has a background on that. There's a history there. AI has been around for a long time, right? So generative AI is really the new version of what AI was, right? And in a lot of ways, if we were to define it correctly, it's emulated intelligence, right? I have an algorithm that runs on a data set and I determine information based upon that, all the way down to even how we use language. So that is fantastic. The narrative that we hear in the general populace is that AI is going to impact several areas of the business. Within CX, we find the highest capture rate of ROI that you do. Well, and again, I say highest, but it's definitely up there, right? Where it's the most optimized. And then subset under CX, then we find the customer journey and the different areas in that customer journey where AI is applicable. And that's really what we drill down to on a regular basis is where's the best areas of improvement that you can find within that CX journey. So hopefully that grasps your question in a great way.
Oh, absolutely. I think what I hear the most, and the thing that I want to emphasize the most of what you said is where's the business value, right?
Yeah.
That's the best. And again, when you're doing digital transformation using AI or not using AI, the same is true. It's all about the business case. David, what about you and your journeys as an expert? Where do you find, what's traditional about AI, right?
Yeah. So just to kind of add or emphasize what Andy was talking about, I think if you summarize even what he said, it really is determined by accessibility. It is now more accessible to more people. More people are understanding. It used to be data scientists that knew about AI, but the generative aspect, the advent in late 2022 of ChatGPT, not only brought an awareness, but an accessibility. And now there's a plethora of options out there. So no time in history has been like it is right now. And essentially, if you look at the landscape of where AI is even going with video and text and speech and emulating people that look like they're live, but they're not live. There's a whole serious implication that, we could go off on a tangent and talk about that. But by and large, I think that the business value really lies in the company's ability to understand. This is kind of a precursor where companies are going to quickly very much realize this is the case with automation too. But this takes this hyper automation / hyper problem or challenge to solve even greater. A lot of companies do not have good documented processes. They do what they do, but business changes on a dime. They forget to document it. The process changes. Nobody seems to know what has happened. And when you start trying to go down the road of generative AI, weaving it into automation to enable hyper automation with AI or even generative AI, you start to find the holes in the boat very quickly. So it's really about plugging that. Andy, I know you've had a lot of high-level positions and things. Kind of talk to folks a little bit about, their process optimization and how that's so important to make sure they have a good, solid foundation, because without it, implementing generative AI might be a little bit more challenging than what one might even think.
Well, that seems to be one of the big misnomers, right? Is I implement generative AI and I solve for other issues, bad documentation, poor data, and lack of process, to your point earlier. And that's just not the case with the way AI works. Again, you're taking information and you're relaying that information. And so I go back to the narrative, right? AI is going to impact all of us in a multitude of ways. Everything from the finance sector to think about doing your expenses, right? At some point in time, there is an AI company, I might know one, that is doing expenses, right, with AI. So imagine that you're out and you're doing your flights and your meals and whatnot, and does your expenses for you. Paralegal work, it's going to impact there. But the outcomes and the return on that are not quite as important as they are in the CX world, right? We just see a higher value and outcome there. So going back to your question, I mean, at the end of the day, we're going to see AI hit each one of those areas, but you have to have the appropriate data set and process in place in order for it to be optimized. And when we're talking about efficiency gains, a 4% versus an 8% efficiency gain, let's just say on the front end for call containment, right? If we were to take that, or interaction containment, I should say, which is a better way of putting it, if we were to talk about that containment and we get a difference between 4 and 8%, that could be worth millions of dollars a month to many customers. So having that back end information is critical. It's key. Also implementing the right LLMs, doing the right RAG models, but there's even AI that I've seen as of late that can do multiple pings to multiple multiple LLMs, and they're running AI on top of AI to determine which is the best answer, or consolidating that answer from the 3 different answers that they get. And that gets us down into a whole nother rabbit hole of how you prompt engineer appropriately these different, whether it's Gemini 1.5, Claude 3, whatever it is today, 3.5, I believe it is, ChatGPT 4.0, etc., Dolphin 2.5. It doesn't matter which one it is. That prompt engineering becomes really, really huge. And then you got to determine what type of information. And they're all censored, by the way. They're all filtered and they're all censored to some degree. The Dan model, if you guys know what the Dan model is, the Dan model, it probably is eradicated. Once we found out how to do the Dan model, and for your audience that doesn't know, that's the do anything now. That was taking out the filtration and the censorship to do anything now. That might have helped, David, to your question, with having bad data, because usually utilizing the Dan model would allow for you to essentially obfuscate or just find truth within the data. But those things are being obfuscated even now, as we see with AI. But that doesn't mean we can't leverage it in another way.
Yep.
So,
well, I absolutely agree. I mean, the one thing that I want to make sure when we're talking about the tides of AI, I remember a decade ago working with a Fortune 50 telco company, building correlation models, root cause analysis, clustering to create incident tickets to reduce service level outage containment. So, a lot of people are like, "Oh, this is new." It's not, right? To your point earlier, like, the bang for your buck is getting better. So that means that, like, to your point on expense generation, maybe that isn't the biggest bang for the buck now, but I could certainly envision every tool that you have is going to have some kind of AI guide to it, and it's going to do more and more of that heavy lifting, because that saves the consumer, the user, so much time and effort and confusion, whether it be a phone call, whether it be a ticket, whether it be a chat message. The end of the day is having AI to do the things that nobody wants to do is really the end goal. And it has been that goal since people figured out, wait a second, this person pushing paper is costing too much money. What can we do about that? Or, hey, this guy that I hired isn't working out, and I can't hire somebody to replace him. The old fog and mirror discussion of quality of employees is replaced with, hey, maybe AI can help us on some of these things that you don't need skill to. But I am the first proponent to say, like, it will never replace the experts. It will never replace the people who come in and make business value. It will just enhance them and allow them to focus and bring their service up to another level.
Can I add to that right there? Because I think you hit a really important point. Everybody's worried about AI, or the future of AI and AGI, right, where it's more human-like in that regard. But at the end of the day, you just hit the most important point that people don't realize. Intuition matters, right? We have that, but experience is massive. AI doesn't have experience, right? All it has is information from a data set that you provided it in some capacity or another, or you've enabled it to go get. It does not have the experiential understanding. It has never stubbed its toe. I've been fortunate enough in my career to have built out multiple platforms, 5 right now, 5 or 6 in my life. I've stubbed my toe quite a bit, and my toes feel it. And AI's never done that before. So how do you subvert? And again, we won't talk about some of the things that have happened as of late with some big software companies and causing outages and whatnot. But some of that can be deferred, not by AI, but by experience. And so that always needs to be taken into consideration. Sorry, I wanted to do that tangent right there.
To your point, automation is the value, right?
Right.
And that's the place that Gen AI goes on to. What it doesn't have, and I don't think it will never have, is the experience for the control or the governance. And again, what we are both thinking about from the news is all about governance, right? Control. And I'd love to make a call out to some of the things that we've talked about in previous podcasts. If you haven't, transformationleaderspodcast.com, read up. We've got plenty of past podcasts that we've talked about some of these items, but we've talked about a lot of our past here. What are some of the negative examples and the misunderstandings? And I love to kind of remember the stub toes. That's me, because it always burns in my mind. I remember the first time we implemented a machine learning algorithm called Holt's Winner. I don't know if you ever heard of Holt's Winner, but it was a seasonality. So it was very important for usage metrics. So, for example, power. More power is used during the middle of the day than at night. Or, same thing with bandwidth. Bandwidth is more, on a business link, 8 to 5. So you could see seasonalities, and you could set threshold levels using that seasonality. The problem that we had was we decided we could figure it out without data science. The second thing is we never had a high quality data set before starting, right? This is stuff, and I'm talking about 20 years in the past with some of this stuff.
Hey, Shawn.
But I see the same mistakes happening. David?
Well, I just wanted to make a quick call out. One of our viewers that's live watching the stream right now had just made a comment. His name is Bunyamin. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. But he said, reminds me AI won't replace jobs. Someone who understands AI will. A good starting point is low code, no code type of learning, which gives you an opportunity to peek into how these things work without having an extensive historic knowledge on the subject. You choose if the AI tide is scary or exciting. And so that really is a great summary. So,
oh yeah. I mean, David, you're Mr. Superman low code. When it comes down to, and I know we've had plenty of positive examples of low code plus Gen AI equals rapid deployment and rapid value.
Yeah. Well, let's go into a little deeper. And I've had experiences where I've gone and talked to customers that have an 18-month roadmap on generative AI. And I've stopped them and said, this is wrong, guys. And they go, what do you mean? I said, you can't have an 18-month roadmap on something that's transforming every 90 days. And when I say transforming, I'm talking, look at ChatGPT 3.5 to 4.0, right? It is a massive difference from the voice inflection to even how it garners data and then relays it. It's huge. You shouldn't have that big of a roadmap. Start small. Start optimal. And going back to your other point about the data set, use 3 PDFs that you know that your technical writers are going to use on a regular basis, and only source those as your LLM. You do something like that, you get incremental value very, very quickly. If you can get that incremental value, you can move forward. And again, part of that all goes in that deciding factor of choosing the right platform to be able to do that. And those are things that we won't talk about here, but at the same time, that's really, really critical. I'm an agnostic guy right now, so I get to go wherever I want. But the point is you want to start small, make it simple, hit one area. Once you hit that one area, then expand from there. Don't do these big. I'm a product guy. I love big vision. Don't get me wrong. I dance for big vision. I totally saw them before it. But the strategy all goes down to the execution, which is task oriented. And once I get to that task and complete that task, I can move up to that vision. Don't do it the other way around. That would be my advice any day of the week.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, again, digital transformation is solving business problems, right? And business solutions are 3 parts. They're the people, process, and technology, right?
Yeah,
and
agreed.
Your whole point is don't forget the process. The approach is what I think I've seen, to your point on different large language models, I've seen people talk about all different names of people I've never heard of, partners I've never heard of. And I tell them, look, that isn't the worry you should have. What's your approach, right? Are you going through for sustained excellence in Gen AI, or are you trying to make a big splash and hope it works? If you're looking for the Hail Mary pass, as a football fan, I've seen many of the Hail Mary passes fail and miss the playoffs. I'm a Dolphins fan, but the end of the
day. Sorry, we got to laugh there, don't we, David?
Yeah, for sure. And I lived in Florida for quite a while, so that definitely rings true.
Dan Marino was one of the best. I mean, to be fair,
again, he was 3 decades ago. Yes. The bottom line that I keep telling people is they always look to the shiniest of objects, which is the technology. I'm a technologist, right?
Yeah.
So I understand that. I mean, Llama, what was it just the other day? 405 billion parameters. 405 billion. To your point earlier, like if you're putting technology in your roadmap, you're going to have to just realize and recognize that it's
come on, Bunyan, you got to watch it live, even though he's a Dolphins fan. He just posted.
Hey, again, everybody makes their own mistakes, right? But, want to pull back to, the key lessons we all know when it comes to when you bring AI to the table. And I would really call in to where I stubbed my toe. And that is make sure you have good data, right?
Yeah.
Make sure that you're on a process with people that can execute the vision. Because a lot of times, and this is a common Shawn saying, generative AI is not a magic wand. It is a technology. It's not even a product. A lot of people think that you could just spread like spreading Nutella on anything. Oh, it tastes great. It doesn't work that way. Andy?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Well, you asked for an example. I just recently was talking to a customer who implemented generative AI in the front end of the virtual assistant. And when they implemented it, the callers that called in, everything went fine for a period of time. And then they were playing around with how the LLM model works, and they were doing some different prompting to make it sound more professional or less. Well, they ended up putting in a prompt for the generative AI to respond to customers that was wrong. And it ended up using expletives when a customer asked a question. So, and they were bad. And
Private
it happened.
LLM.
What's that?
Private LLM.
Private LLM.
Yeah,
Yep.
and those are the risks. That's an excellent call out there because
So
going back to that censorship, that doesn't happen, but they got them in a pickle quick.
they did, but here's the biggest problem. They wanted to throw the whole thing away. I said, now wait a minute.
No.
Wait a minute. So you guys got to stop. You don't want to throw don't throw the baby out with the bathwater here yet, because how many of your employees have done the same thing? And they said, well, we never thought about it that way. I said, I bet that happens 2 to 3 times an hour with your employees, with the amount of traffic that you guys get. So you're going to blame an LLM that we hold it to this high standard. It's not only a magic wand, but we hold it to this standard that is above and beyond anything because we think of it as being perfect. It's not, because guess what? It was built by us and we're not perfect, right? So even the best generative AI still has its flaws. So that's something that we definitely wanted to call out there.
Yeah,
absolutely great point for definitely a deep dive in the future. What is an appropriate standard quality for AI? I remember back in the day we used to say Lucent, which was the coffee mug seal of quality.
Yeah, they paid $35 million for that logo. I worked there.
I did too. So now I'd like to go through. David, I know we've talked about this before, but do you see a difference in value that you expect AI from right now into the future? Like, what kind of value change do you see?
I think the value for me is more along the lines of working with customers and people to understand the value or to understand the angle. Andy was touching base on a lot of those consultative type of engagements. And I think that's really the key. So if you are in a business, you're a leader, and you have a fairly decent understanding of AI, the biggest thing or benefit and value that you can bring to your business is educating those that are in your organization about it, come up with 3 goals for that incremental process and map and correlate them into some either low code or some project that you can do to test, improve this thing widely. The other thing that I would call out to folks at the very top of the organization, when you're trying to wrap your head around this and figure out next steps, yes, generative AI is, the next ebb and flow of the tide of this AI thing. But one of the things that, if you just think of traditional business, what is the most valuable asset your company has? People. And if your people magically got smarter overnight or somewhat smarter because they had an AI, something like some private LLM or a chat GPT subscription or something to help round out the edges or sharpen the saw, so to speak, so that whatever skills that they currently have, if it was just slightly elevated, what would be the value to your business? Incremental value, incremental changes in that area. So as the staff levels up in skill, because they have the ability to essentially fill in those gaps that they might have. So if there's an acronym that's thrown out or anything, the point is, normally you'd Google search this and you'd have to sift through this information, but this information is instantaneous. So whatever job you're doing, writing an email, on the phone, doing whatever it is that you need to do, think of that sidecar. I always use that term where that AI is like your assistant. We all wish we had an assistant. Now, everybody does have an assistant. So I don't care if you have a subscription or not. You've got Bing, which has embedded the Azure version of the AI. You've got the free ChatGPT. There's there's a plethora of solutions out there. You need to consider those angles with dealing with your employees and getting their skills up. Again, focusing on at least 3 core main skills moving forward. And yes, we said all this earlier. Make sure you have that foundational information. Get your data and your ducks in a row. The data needs to be where it needs to be. Your processes need to be where it is. And if you can align your people, your processes, your data, plus having access, I think you're well on your way, much further than even those that I talked to today. They're still struggling how to figure out how to implement this and move this. And they're trying to Andy's point, they're trying to bite off more than they can chew. And I think coming up with a strategic outline and a plan might be good to maybe figure out, hey, how are we going to implement or roll this out over 18 months? But don't try to put AI in a box, because whatever you think you know, as per the 90-day cycle, it's all going to change, or the capabilities are going to change, or there's new restrictions. Who knows? One thing that we haven't talked about on any of the podcasts, and I'd like to defer to Andy because I'd like to get his spin on it. When we talk about governance, we're talking about it from the perspective of an organization. We haven't talked about, what about governmental compliance, governmental governance? Like, where do you see AI coming in from a company? So, for example, China has very strict restrictions on certain sites that you can get to. If you've ever traveled to Beijing or anywhere in China, you can't get to certain sites because they're just not accessible. So we've got governmental compliance and control dictating what the society can get to. And so as we think about in terms of AI, I haven't seen a lot of great discussions other than a few podcasts talking about governmental compliance, governmental oversight about what AI can be used for, what it can't be used for, and then regulation around that. So we've always focused at the smaller level, but if we look out at the more macro level, what kind of things are you hearing or seeing, or are you involved in anything with government? Just like to hear your spin at that much higher level, where AI kind of fits into the picture for these folks and what it might mean to people and companies.
Yeah. Well, most governments haven't taken a full-on stance. I say most. There are some that have taken somewhat of a stance, in particular in Europe. So they've taken a little bit of a stance on it. It's primarily been around PCI, HIPAA, PI information. Those have been the areas where they've looked at it the most in sharing that out. And we have just recently California coming out with their latest news, where one of the retail vendors is in situation where they've used personal information in order to improve an AI system, right? And that is not allowed in California, and every state is even different in that regard. So we haven't seen a consensus yet from a government perspective in regulation of this, but the censorship does still exist. So there is another layer of the government, and again, not going down this rabbit hole at all, because this is a deeper one, I'm sure, but there is it's not a top level, it's not a layer of government that we have visibility into. It's the layer 2, where you've got things like HIPAA and PCI compliance. Those are being done by the agencies, and they're subjecting. And again, we're seeing one of the first lawsuits just come out. What was it, Monday of this week? Come out against AI. And so it will be those that will start to dictate and put this more in front of governmental agencies. And again, depending on where you stand on this particular issue, it's something to be aware of. But the censorship, I mean, we talked about Dan earlier, the censorship is there. So despite what the data says and being truthful, there's still a narrative that's being told, which again, going back to the previous point, we can take advantage of and utilize today. Because if I can give a script to somebody who's taking an interaction and give them the right script, then to your point, David, I've just raised them up 2 levels from what they were going to say initially. So, again, I wish I could say more about where the government is stepping in, or governments, I should say, because it is a worldwide phenomenon. But I think they will ultimately get more involved at some point. It hasn't done anything with the suppression that they've been able to already accomplish through agencies. They haven't had a need for it yet. I think if you see more and more open-ended systems coming out, I think that will change.
Yeah, I mean, I see this as very much Internet 2.0, right? That's kind of what we're seeing, because I remember back in the day, and maybe Andy, David, you remember Sarbanes-Oxley, right? When Sarbanes-Oxley hit, then we sold things like internet proxies, right, for governance. So we go in there and say, hey, this company is using this service, internet access, for their employees or externally. And we want to understand the people who are coming and using these services to make sure they're using it for good business value, right? And, I think generative AI, the next thing, the value we're going to see in the next 6 to 12 months is more governance, more compliance. And we all know that government catches up, right? There's going to be people with burned fingers. There already, look on the internet, there's plenty of people with burned fingers and toes out there when it comes down to governance of AI. And that is going to be the watchword for a lot of businesses. And I recommend every brand out there, if you're using AI, make sure you are using AI and your business is controlling AI, not the other way around, right?
Yeah.
Have good governance hygiene to make sure that when these systems fail, we just talked about that other company that got in trouble taking down the world's IT for 2 days. Governance is what's going to save you when your boss knocks on the door and says, "How did you let this happen?" And say, "I didn't. We have the stakeholders. We have our rules of the road. We followed everything." People could forgive a black swan event, which is they happen, but they won't be able to forgive you when you were complacent. So governance, compliance. I think the next 6 to 12 months, I think that's going to be the majority of the conversations I hear about brands when they talk about generative AI. I think they know the technology works. They know that there's value there. But there is still a lot of naysayers out there who are very worried. There are cyber insurance providers who are putting, the screws onto these brands and saying, if you want your insurance, you're going to have to do these things. And that as every new technology is adopted, there's going to be this kind of layer. So, I want to continue the conversation, because one thing that I think we've done a disservice in this channel talking about is that verticalization of AI, right? When it comes down to it, a healthcare using an AI and a retail using an AI and a telco using AI may be completely different rules. And, as we're talking about the tides, some boats are bigger than others and the tide's not going to rise them, So I'm seeing a lot of businesses that have HIPAA compliancy questions, PCI compliance issues, PII, these kind of things. The more that they worry about those acronyms, the more that they are lagging behind. Are you, I'll start with Andy. Andy, are you seeing clients in that same thing? Verticalization is really showing the aptitude and acceleration and adoption of Gen AI.
Yeah, definitely in finance, fintech, healthcare, retail. The verticalization is massive. What's really, really interesting is when you talk to a lot of customers, or you're on the boards, or you're with the folks. The people who are in the room now are broader than they've ever been. So I've been in this industry for too long to even want to mention here, because then everybody will know how old I am. But the idea is, it used to be the CIO, CTO, and their folks, right? Those were the people that you were talking to on a regular basis. Now I've got VP of sales in there. I've got the chief marketing officer in there. And the most important usually is the CISO, right? The chief security officer being in the room, going back to a previous point. And they are dictating and helping align. Everybody was worried about hallucinations. Hallucinations are the least of your worries. I mean, they really, really are. Giving wrong information once or twice is one thing. It's these other underlying issues that you need to be mindful of. And so
jailbreaking.
Yeah, they really can be. But that's why you start small. You start concise. You know what you're doing. You start with the easy stuff too. I mean, get the easy stuff out of the way, and then you can work into the more complex instead of the other way around, right? That is always a good path to go. But in those verticals, we do see a higher adoption with some of those verticals that you mentioned. I mean, healthcare and banking are really stepping up to plate, and retail's not far behind. I mean, we can talk about even international retail. Some of the big articles that they published were so impactful to the industry, say in March, right? That it transformed a lot of different things. So you mentioned the top three. I think there's more up and coming. Ironically, manufacturing is going to come up on that list. We're going to see more in the public sector. So you're going to see more and more of that. But I think the top three you've already hit. And it's easier to do obfuscation of personal information with AI when done correctly and when doing it systematically. You talk about people and process. We need that people and process to BC's point. I'm going to call him BC, who's in the chat here, because if I say his name wrong, I'll feel bad. But if you implement it with people and process and do that systematically, boy, the outcomes you're going to get those outcomes. You might get them incremental at first, but overall they're going to pay off. So making sure that you're HIPAA compliant, making sure PII, making sure you're obfuscating the data that you need to obfuscate is massive. And then how you use that data and where it goes. Again, going back to the lawsuit that's going on currently here in the U.S. in California in particular, right? That you got to be mindful of that, and that really comes to integrity, and integrity comes from people and process. So that governance usually is guided, and those guardrails are set up by having an appropriate process of how you implement things.
David, verticalization, I know a lot of the things that we've talked about in the past have been like, focus on internal before external, right? So it's almost verticalized proof. But, where do you see when you start making AI focus outward? What are the verticals that you see most applicable immediately?
I think for me, as far as dealing with all of the verticals, this then comes down to, especially when you start talking about outside the organization. So whatever value is for their existence, whether it's a product or a service or whatever it might be, it's going to come down to customer satisfaction. And so this, irregardless of verticalization, is going to ring true for any and all verticals. Like we listed top 3 or 4 verticals here. But when we start getting into these types of things, it's like saying that what industries are computers good for? In today's day and age, everybody uses a computer if you own a business. So this type of AI, generally speaking, CSAT, evaluative type of scenarios where you're looking at margin, cost control, and this is where generative AI, if prompted accurately, and if you have good data, so this is all coming full circle again, you can then get really great algorithmic type of results from it with very specific prompts. And then you build those prompts in such a way to where you create aggregate, I'm getting very geeky, data sets or information that you can then evaluate, average out, and essentially do things that are more investigative type of reporting as opposed to empirical data, just numerical values. Because if you have an algorithm behind it and then ask the question, is this algorithm the right algorithm? What are some other perspectives that I can do this math with this goal? I'm trying to figure out or solve this problem or monitor this outcome. When you start asking generative AI, and this goes back to that earlier comment I made about taking your skill set and leveling up, because we all get stuck in a rut. As humans, we're very deterministic in our patterns and what we do in our daily lives, especially if we know it works and there's success in it. Why rock the boat? Why go outside the box? And so when you're dealing with these types of things externally, look at your process, look at what you're doing, but ask generative AI if there's another angle, if there's another perspective, if there's another, what am I missing even? And just play with the data, play with what you've got. And I guarantee you will find something quite interesting of insight that you didn't look at, a different perspective, and that light bulb moment is going to come on. You group, you have everybody do that. In business, we always have, or even, I don't know, I think everybody has at one point or another read Stephen Covey, The Sharpening of the Saw, Step 7. And that's the same thing here, where just because you have something that works doesn't mean that's the end all be all. Generative AI is now providing this opportunity to take what's working and even make it better. And I think a lot of people miss that key step.
Yes.
Is, oh, well, we just use it to solve a problem. Well, sometimes you don't know that you have a problem. And this is why great consultants exist. They come in, they help you provide a different perspective, and they say, and to your point earlier, Andy, oh, well, we got this wonderful 18-month rollout for generative AI. And he's like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
And so, what do you mean? And it's like, they're like, so when you ask these same questions or just run that, don't be afraid to ask. I highly encourage folks to take this generative AI era that we're in and throw into it, and don't try to boil the ocean. Just take a piece of it and start there and keep repeating through the layers, and then say, okay, here's all the information you gave me. How can I do this better? What's a better way of doing it? And here's how I do it now. And I'll leave it there, because honestly, that's exactly what I think they need to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, one of the things that a lot of people get way too overwhelmed with, which is, you know, where do I start? You know, where do you, like, again, what do I remember back in the 90s? They're like, internet, where do we start? Well, you learn how to search on Google. You know, what a plus does, what a minus does.
Oh, wait a minute. We didn't
keywords.
search on Google back then. When we first started on the internet, we were searching on some different platforms. Netscape, right?
Oh, absolutely. You know, technology is always going to be changing. Yes. But, you know, David, to your point, you know, learning how to just pull up a prompt and interact with it and see where the value, personal value, outside of business, personal value, and having that assistant. Now, one of the things that I definitely wanted to cover in this call, with the tides of AI being the way that they are, is what about the businesses out there that feel like they're being left out, right? Because they're not digital businesses, they're physical brick and mortar businesses. You know, I know I've walked into, you know, your department stores, right? And, you know, there's not many people walking around nowadays. You know, this is a lot of the questions for those physical domain businesses. How can AI help us get our business going? And, you know, I'd love to see, where do you see the future of that, Andy? You know, I know we're very much, we help digital transformation, but what about the people who are looking for digital transformation in a brick and mortar type situation?
Well, brick and mortar, and if you don't mind, I'd like to add to that. I said manufacturing earlier. Yes. Internal processes for manufacturing. So, and I'm going to talk light manufacturing right now, because I could go into, you know, how they create limestone for bricklayers type of a situation. But I'm a big four-wheeling guy, so I like to buy expensive vehicles and then take them out onto the rocks and see if I can damage them, or at least climb over those rocks. Either way, it's delightful.
It's a good time.
But there's a lot of manufacturers that do the welding. They build the bumpers, they build the rock, the rails, the sliders, etc. They need AI to help with. There's all kinds of a geometric, and I mean the way that you know, adjust your caliber and your camber, or your camber and your caster. Thank you. That was the word I was trying to think of. All those things can be helped by AI. So even the process in the shop, not just ordering the part, but even the processes in the shop can be helped with AI, but they usually don't know where to start and how to utilize that from the beginning. And again, it goes back to something David said. This is where having somebody knowledgeable as a consultant, or as an individual who has that knowledge, or even hiring somebody with some of that knowledge, can implement those type of things. If I'm building stuff for, I'm not going to say the Jeep name, so we'll say the Bronco name, right? If I'm building stuff for Broncos and I need to set up a certain upper control arm that has a specific caster and camber for a certain type of shock, that can all be done with AI. I don't have to do that via napkin math anymore, which is what they used to do, right? That's how even people get your alignment done. I can get that all done with AI now. So there's implications there in the business. And so the retail stores, you're absolutely right. Retail stores can utilize AI in a number of different ways. We've seen some self-service options. Those are not always the best, but informing the client before they actually even walk in is also something that would be beneficial even for a retail store. So we do see different aspects. Just recently, there's a restaurant that actually had a robot deliver the food. I don't know if you've ever seen this before, but it has like 3 trays and they will come and bring it to you. So we're seeing some of that, but again, it's light today. I think manufacturing is going to be optimal here in the future, but it's not just that. The accounting firms, the paralegal firms that I mentioned earlier, they're going to see some optimization. But even the local flower shop, in trying to pan out and look at their entire budget for the year and what they need to bring in, where they need to source it from, AI can help with that too. So it's all these nominal things that we've always struggled with in the past to get right. AI can step in and help solve some of those problems.
So, David, where does your mind think of when we jump into that brick and mortar world? How does a brick and mortar world really take advantage of the AI revolution?
So to use some examples earlier that Andy used, I noticed a common theme. At every part, from the example of the control arm to your example of retail is sitting there, maybe there's not a lot of foot traffic going on anymore. All of those businesses and all those use cases are generating data of some sort. So whether or not I'm dealing with probability and statistics from how can I increase my foot traffic to, hey, what are the possible angles or ways that I can develop or design this control arm? It's probability and statistics in both use cases for both verticals, completely and radically different, but the same theme exists underlying: data and probability and statistics. So I think Elon Musk does a really great job of breaking down problems into first principle. And I think if business leaders think of their verticals and break them down to first principle, and then apply generative AI to a perspective or angle of that, again, with the help potentially of a consultant to help that process. Retail's obviously struggling big time right now, but those same customers, even though they're physically not there, they exist online. They're still out there, right? And so e-commerce is all the rage as well. So whether or not their foot traffic needs to transition fully to online, or they need to collapse the number of stores, or whatever the case may be, at the end result, they have a need for revenue. They have a need for sales generation. They have a need or an opportunity to reduce inventory. Why should I keep all this extra inventory? If you don't sell it, you got to pay tax on it. So why do that either? So find out what's selling, find out what's not selling, find out what's trending. Like, all of these different things can be used with a probability and statistics angle to help them enrich their data to make the decisions to solve the problems or to fill in the holes, to either increase the sales, get where they need to be. They can come up with something really creative, even with just an app on the phone, so that when the client runs through the door, boom, hey, the app just does a notification. Hey, aisle 6, we've got a sale on this, whatever. You've expressed a recent online interest of whatever, or I don't know, whatever metadata that they've got access to that they built this customer profile on. It will customize the user experience. They could be just walking down the street, maybe going to a restaurant, and they're past their favorite retailer. The retailer says, hey, you're within literally 500 feet from this really cool whatever. Why don't you stop on by? And then, of course, strategize with, hey, is there a correlation between these most popular items that we sell and what other else might be going on? I did a lot of stuff for Mattel back in the day with some shelf optimization of merchandising of, top to bottom, left to right, and also correlations. And Walmart's real big at this. If you've ever checked out there, they love to put impulse purchase items right there at the cash register. So the whole point of evaluating in this theme of probability and statistics helps with merchandising. It helps with trying to figure out where the customer's at. and to help them build a better user experience that is a no-brainer, because that's what you want to do. You want to take that decision process away from the customer and just go, ooh, yes, now. And that'll result in higher revenue. So I think this is really kind of the angle that leaders should be thinking, or approach, or strategy to take, because I think at the end of the day, we're all looking for increased revenue. I don't care what business you're in. If you don't have any money, you're going out of business.
I mean, I'd like to call out real quick, whether it's the sales floor or it's in the shop floor, everybody has one of these, someone near it, right? So, maybe your shop guy, Andy, to your point, you can go through it and look at the wheel well, and it could tell you the angle's not right, dude, right? That's helps with quality.
Yeah.
David, to your point, I have this when I'm being dragged to the department store by my wife, and I typically leave an app open, right? And hyper personalization in the sales experience, as we talked about before, so I think when it comes to generative AI, whether it be vertical, physical, virtual, I think there's value for all businesses. And that's why, as we talked about in the last podcast, that it's such a bubble right now. But to really put, my future dunce hat on and start doing some predictions, I'd really like to talk, if we're talking about the tides of AI, when are the tides going to be at its peak? And that's when people talk about AGI. My personal belief is that AGI is going to be a very big discussion point for businesses. I think it's going to be evolutionary in nature, meaning that one day they're just not going to release something that, hey, we've made it. It's going to be an incremental goal, like the speed of light. We're never going to get 100% there, but I see this as a 3 to 5 year journey of maturity of generative AI. That's how I see AGI. Other people are out there planning to worship a digital god, but for me, I, based upon the umpteenth amount of years, just like you, Andy, in this business, I haven't seen something that revolutionary in technology. So want to go around the room one last time. AGI, what do you see? What is your prediction of how that plays out? Andy?
I see AGI. First of all, I would qualify. You're right. We have to be somewhat prophetic, right? When we're looking at this stuff, right? To make sure that we understand where it's going. AGI is optimal, and I don't know how to measure whether or not AGI is truly achieved or not. And so I think that is going to be the bigger issue. Is there's going to be claims of AGI. At the end of the day, how do I replicate intuition? How do I replicate emotional quotient within something that is just running algorithms on data? I see more, what I see in the future in the interim between now and possibly what AGI could bring is AI on AI. That's where things get really, really interesting, where you have AI interacting with one another, where I'm looking at multiple LLMs, where I'm even applying AI frameworks on top of AI frameworks. That compounding will emulate, I believe, what we see as AGI coming. So I reserve the right to be wrong, as in all cases, but that's what I'm thinking is going to happen. Is I'm just seeing the subtlety right now of AI on AI, and it works really well. And when I say works really well, like I'm talking about a difference between 8 to 12% in containment on the front end in the CX journey. That in and of itself is worth a ton. And if we start applying that into other areas, we're going to see more and more of that. And I think it's going to start impacting other areas beyond the CX world more and more. As that happens, that will also impact the CX world. Because if I can make the time for somebody to do their job better, to David's point earlier, or level them up, that's going to be huge. So what will AGI ultimately accomplish? Well, maybe we'll emulate that EQ when I need it on the phone when my flight's been delayed. Who knows? I don't know what driving outcome is going to continue to drive that, and hopefully it's used with a classy, with integrity nature throughout the entire world, and it's used well. So I'll leave it at that.
David, put on that prediction hat. AGI. It's a buzzword.
Yeah. So I hate speculation. I try to ground it in reality. And to me, I think AGI means something different to everybody. If you look at define what is a sentient being? What is a human being? And what makes them intelligent? And where does that intelligence lie? And you start asking these questions. And if you just look at even the three of us from our unique experiences, our perspectives, we share common ideas and thought patterns, but we also have areas of specialty, areas of expertise. And when I think of AGI and AI in general, I think each industry, each person, it's going to mean something different to them, or their measurement or litmus test. Is this artificial general intelligence, or is this some variation of it? For me, the takeaway is if it does everything I need it to do, and I'm personally satisfied because it's doing and answering every hole and fulfilling my need, okay, I would maybe consider that on the path of or near AGI. If you start asking it a question and it gets emotionally one way or the other, okay, maybe that's generative or AGI. But I think by and large, if you take the emotion portion out of it, because the effectiveness of what it can or can't do for you or me or them or whoever it may be, it really comes down to, look, what are your goals? Can I use it to accomplish what I need to do? And can it make me do whatever it is that I do better? To me, that's either leading towards generative AI or is generative AI in and of itself. And argumentatively, I think emotion probably will play the biggest quotient into that equation of whatever that means to you or whoever's evaluating that question for themselves.
Yeah. So I really appreciate the great conversation. Andy, welcome. Anytime you want to talk to us, love to have you. Great conversation and your insights. Want to call out and thank him for joining us. Look at and check out his LinkedIn. Really happy to go through this with you two today. David, do you want to talk a little bit about our website? Maybe some sponsorship opportunities?
Yeah, sure. So everybody can check us out in a bunch of channels. Each of us have our profiles on LinkedIn. We have a website at transformationleaderspodcast.com. If you take that same keyword, Transformation Leaders Podcast, just go to youtube.com at Transformation Leaders Podcast. There you'll find all of our previous podcasts, and those are also available online as well. Anytime that you want to stop by and see us every Wednesday, we stream at noon Eastern Standard Time. So I just again want to thank Andy and Shawn for being with us today, and we look forward to seeing you on